Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and Leap, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with test school and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is what motivates students in test prep. But first, let's meet our special guest, Athena Savino.
Athena Savino is the founder of Top Marks Prep, a platform that partners with tutoring centers to help students achieve better outcomes on high school and college admissions tests through smarter practice and data-driven instruction. The daughter of immigrant parents who came to the U.S. to expand educational opportunity for their family, Athena grew up with a deep appreciation for what access to the right tools and support can do. She earned her undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley and her MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She began tutoring while pursuing her MBA and discovered that what actually moved the needle for students was simple but underappreciated: repetition and the motivation to keep improving with each attempt. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited to talk about student motivation.
Athena, we are equally excited, I think, to talk about student motivation. We certainly love that topic. Before we dive in, though, let's talk about you and your background and what led you to this particular place in education.
Yeah, I come from management consulting. So I was a management consultant for 7, 8 years. And basically what that meant was I would get placed in some Fortune 500 company that had some operational issue. And I would usually go in and figure out how can we use technology to maybe solve this, help this, what have you. And I liked what I was working on. I liked technology. I liked operations, but I needed something more socially impactful. And like Amy mentioned, I'm an immigrant. My parents came here for my education. I actually come from a grandpa who dropped out of school at 7 years old because he had to earn money for his family, never learned to read or write, became an entrepreneur. And so it's had this huge impact on my family's trajectory. And so thinking about how I wanted to pivot my career, education made sense, but I didn't know anything about it. And so that's why I went to business school, to kind of give myself time to explore. And on the side, I was tutoring. I'm based in Chicago, and we have this very specific exam for high school entrance. And so I was tutoring for that. And that was kind of my first exposure into the world of tutoring, the world of test prep. So that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah, it's funny how many people find that the thing that they're doing on the side
Yeah.
turns out to be what they were looking for all along.
Right.
At least when it comes to what we do.
Yeah, the side gig turns into an amazing opportunity is how I try to frame it for myself, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I was launched into this world of working directly with students, which was highly rewarding. And then figuring out my space within it. I've done everything from one-on-one tutoring to teaching classes. And now I get to work with tutors across the country, which is fun.
So tell us more about Top Marks Prep and what the platform does.
Yeah, so it's an adaptive learning platform that's built specifically to work alongside tutors in the tutoring operation. Students get access to an adaptive practice platform where they can take diagnostics, mock tests, practice questions, and kind of all of that data and usage, like just how they're performing as well as how they're studying, gets fed to the tutor to be able to make real-time decisions on, I see a student who's spending maybe too much time on math when their math score is great. Why don't we redirect the next section into reading, and being able to make highly personalized decisions on their tutoring sessions. So tutors get an admin dashboard, students get an adaptive practice platform.
So this kind of gives us a good segue to the topic about student motivation in prep, because there are so many phenomenal resources. I think we live at a time when there have never been more amazing free and paid resources for students to prep for high stakes tests, for getting help with admissions, like anything you want, you can get. And yet, there's still a gap, there's a deficit. And I think a lot of that has to do with the end user. We're targeting students, and we all, educators, counselors, coaches, parents, we're all thinking deeply about how to help students help themselves, and that help themselves is motivation. So
Exactly.
why do we have so many misconceptions about student motivation, and how can we address that?
Yeah, I think this rise in ed tech over the last 10, 15 years has us just throwing technology at the problem. But
Hmm.
really what I think most technologists come down to is, yeah, but how do we push that student or that end user to actually want to do this?
Yeah.
And so that's something that we've really focused a lot about, and that's why I'm excited to talk to you about it today. I think oftentimes when I talk to tutors or even talk to parents, sometimes the misconception is that that students are going to be motivated by getting into the college of their choice, or hey, if parents throw a reward a dollar amount at a student for getting a certain score, that's going to carry them through 6 months of prep, or a year of prep sometimes, right? And that's really not the case. We as humans aren't so good at working towards a goal that is a year or 2 years out, where you don't see the reward for that long. So how can we create internal motivation or foster internal motivation consistently through the test prep journey?
It's interesting, obviously we know about extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So I think what you're describing is this idea in test prep, even though getting a better score is the goal, the key thing that you're saying is how the intrinsic motivation maybe is probably a more authentic way to sort of get those results. So I'm wondering sort of, do you think there are certain strategies specifically that target to sort of instill that intrinsic motivation?
Yeah, I mean, what the research really shows us is that there's three things that a student needs in order to foster internal motivation. One of them is agency. So, are they bought into the process? Do they feel like they have enough say into the process? And I think, Mike, you mentioned like it's really helpful to have the foundation be their goals. That's great. So, what college do you want to get into? Okay, what score does that college need? Are you committed to trying to work towards that score, and really having that conversation with them, having them buy into that study plan, having them co-create that with you? It gives them agency in the process. That second need is really they need to feel competent throughout the process. So that's where manufacturing small wins for a student is highly impactful in creating and fostering an internal motivation. And then third, and this is really the role of the tutor, and where I think nothing can replace the tutor, is really that relational aspect. Do they trust you? Do they feel like you're communicating with them in a way that they feel like they're in the process with you? Can you have enough relational integrity with them that they feel bought in? And so I think those three things are very important to getting students intrinsically motivated to consistently study and improve towards their target scores.
That last point is really interesting. Do you find, Amy, I wonder if you also find this, that students want to feel like they have a partner in whatever it is that they're doing, right? That relational piece means that they're not doing it alone, even if they're doing the work.
Well, I laugh about this because I got a trainer, back in October, right? And I see her 3 times a week. And as much as I'm doing this, obviously, for the benefit of like my physical strength and fitness, it has been so useful to me in working with students because exactly what you just described, Athena, thinking about it in terms of, agency and, all the different things that like we know in test prep, like are things that are important. I'm seeing that working with a trainer. And so for me, I kind of translate that back with students in terms of my journey, my struggle, right? My struggle with it. But I find that when I talk to students about that and I share about myself, the point is obviously for them to understand there are lots of things for people that are hard, and having someone along the way, just hearing my trainer like, you're doing great, right? Like that's so important because I'm like, oh my gosh, I should be saying that all throughout the session. And sometimes I don't. So those things you're saying, Athena, are so critical because I'm experiencing that personally in my physical fitness journey.
Yeah, it's a great comparison to what it's like for test prep, right? It's a goal. You might have some goal, some fitness goal that might take you a year to accomplish, and you have to put in the
And
work
there's the
every
incremental,
day.
like knowing I'm
Exactly.
either doing more reps this time or I'm lifting heavier weights. I mean, now this is all surrounding numbers, right? And but it relates because for
Yeah,
me, my whole journey is not about a weight loss. It's really about like the strength and the balance. And so I have to look at those things as being important, right? Minutes, reps. And so again, like test prep, looking at it in terms of particular skill or something they remember if they get right, or even if it's just 1 point improvement here, you know,
exactly.
really critical.
Yep.
This conversation brings to mind an old quote. I wonder if you guys have heard it. We all have to choose one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret, right?
I
And
like it,
I
Mike.
think, yeah, and this idea that the pain of discipline is difficult because it feels in the moment challenging.
Yes.
When in fact it's so much more impactful, and it's Amy, you don't want to
It's
do that
empowering.
you don't want to do that final rep, but somebody motivates you to do it, and you do it, and you feel so much better instead of saying I didn't do it and I didn't hit my longer term goals. And there's that tension between who we are today and what is Mike in the present going to deal with, and then what is Mike in the future. That's his problem.
Right.
So,
I do everything I do for future Amy, is what I say.
right.
And as our students, you should, whatever you're doing, you should be doing for future. And that is obviously, we're all about helping students for their futures, but it's getting them to, it's like helping them along the way. We're helping to sort of pull them along. They have to do the work, right? The work is theirs, but we are guiding, we are inspiring, we are hopefully motivating, right? For them to achieve.
Exactly. That is our goal. We are it's not physical fitness training, it's mental fitness training, right?
So let's talk about student needs, and let's talk about, you know, and they can be very different, right, for our students with all the areas of tests we can go over. What do you think the best way to assess student needs is, and to try to sequence your instruction to address those needs?
Yeah, I think I've really seen a spectrum here with tutors. Some tutors are highly experienced and can tell a student's needs in the first 30 seconds, they'll tell you, or the first minute, or they'll have a student do one math question. They can just tell where that student's level might be at. But I do think it is helpful to get a full diagnostic across sections, across a real test environment for a student in order to figure out what skills are they good at, what skills do they need some work in, how are they spending their time when they're testing, how are they feeling at each point of the test. And so collecting I'm a proponent of collecting as much data on that student during that test environment as possible in order to inform where we believe their needs are. And then from there, it's a mixture of how do we sequence their study plan so that it's highly personal to them, so that it one gets them to reach their target score at the end, but then also, and I think that this is actually more important, how do we get them to feel those small wins consistently week over week? And to your point, it's not some end goal. It's, hey, last week you got 5 questions wrong here, and now you're only getting 1 question wrong. That's progress. And that's motivating. That's the biggest motivator for a student.
Yeah, I find that ability to quantify and contextualize progress is often missing in the person who's doing the work, in that students often they, after working hard for a short period, they get really frustrated if they don't see a big gain, which kind of like they thought they would get to their end goal very quickly. And they don't even understand that though that the incremental improvement is quantifiable. And you can say, listen, you got, for the last 3 weeks, you've gotten two more questions right on each section each time. That's how you
And
do
it's
it,
actually what the
right?
research shows is that students who you could show them a big jump over time. Hey, in the last 10 weeks, you've increased your score 80 points. That's great. it'll matter less to them if yesterday they took a mock test that had a lower score than the previous one. So students' idea of progress is highly localized. It's almost hard for them to take in the full picture. And so that's why I really want to impress the idea of small wins consistently, and then that builds upon itself versus throwing a wrench in it and causing like a huge dump, because it's highly demotivating to have a local setback, if you will.
Yeah, I try to
Totally.
frame it for students because I actually tell students if I see a jump too quickly, that's actually concerning to me to see something spike because one, they take for granted that that will continue to happen. What I always say is even if the numbers, the score itself is not jumping, I'm more interested in are you not missing the things this week that you missed before? Because we know as test prep providers, there are going to be skills and things that one week they don't get it, maybe it didn't pop up on a test or maybe we didn't have to go over it. And so I always say like I look at it more like if we keep going over the same things, that's more of an issue. But if we're not going over the same things, I'm like that's a good thing because you're just getting, even more sort of diversity in our conversations with what you
And
need
that's
to
kind of
know.
what I've seen in some tutoring centers where there's like a heavy bias towards using mock tests every week in order to get a kid practice. And I think mock tests are great, don't get me wrong, but I think that they're testing something else. Really, what I use mock tests for myself is to get a kid into the testing mindset. Hey, you're putting together, yes, the
Experience.
experience. It's pressure testing, their anxiety, the timing of the clock, putting everything together. But skill wise, it's not necessarily testing the skill. One mock test might have test a skill in a different way than the mock test before it or the one after it. And so it's not actually a good comparison. That's why leaning into small wins of practice data is can be really motivating to get them to that mock test and feeling good and putting it all together. So I'm not saying don't do mock tests, but what I am saying is
They have
exactly.
their place, right? Simulations have their place, much like skills do. And I think, when we were even talking, like the idea of sequencing what you're doing in instruction is trying to make sure you have an appropriate amount of each, like, because we know that simulations matter. Because if a student never
Exactly.
times themselves, then they don't understand that they have to move faster or what strategies you have to now apply. There's like the big picture tutoring, right? Like I always call like the big picture, the strategies and things we talk about versus the very detail specific, like nuts and bolts of a particular question. And so I think sometimes a good tutor is understanding how they go from the big picture to the more specific skills. And again, it's back to like little wins. Where do we find these little wins? And that can be related to whether you're giving simulations like mock tests versus skill
Yeah,
based
and if there's
practice.
enough data points, there's always something good to find. There's a small win somewhere in there to find, to be able to celebrate and motivate.
What about time frames in terms of like from the very beginning? In your experience, what is an optimal time frame to work towards an achievable goal? Not the, maybe not the longest term goal, but certainly like the first goal.
Yeah, I think this can be really dependent on the students. So, but I'm going to try to make a generalization here. From my experience of working one-on-one with students, I normally find that if we start a year out, it almost feels like too much and overwhelming for the student.
I
So I
agree.
try,
Too
yes,
early, too
yes.
soon is bad. Like, I mean, parents, God love the parents who want to start early, but I learned very early in my career that starting with kids too early, by the time it matters, we've extinguished all motivation that
They're
existed.
burnt
They're
out.
just, they're
They've
spent.
they've
Exactly.
totally checked out. So okay, so I have an optimal timeline.
I would
What's
say
yours,
about
Athena?
6 months out.
So I always phrase it as a season because if students can relate to the fact that every extracurricular
Mhm.
has a 2 to 3 month season. And I think there's a reason why you'd break a sport, even if a student played the sport all year long, they usually break it into 4 seasons. And so that 2 to 3 month for whatever the goal is, knowing that you can continue to get better, right? So 6 months, I mean, it's nice to have that opportunity to work for 6 months, but I feel, or let's say I don't just feel, in my experience, if students don't get to a consequential test of their readiness within 3 or 4 months, they lose the thread. I'm not talking about practice tests. I'm talking about like, yeah,
Like
get at it. Even if we know you're going to test multiple times, and in the current, at least as far as the SAT and ACT go, there's no incentive to just go one and done,
Yes.
except for that timing when most schools either do score choice or super scoring. So I don't know. So tell us about the
Yeah, and
six
I
month
actually maybe a question back to you first.
schedule.
Have you seen that 2 to 3 months change over time? Because the reason I say 6 months is because we've kind of seen like the math foundational skills and even the reading foundational skills really slip. So I'm
that is
Mhm.
true. I
yeah,
will agree with you. That is something that's
I
significantly changed in
yeah,
my career.
I'll say I think it depends on the student because because the real goal is motivation. The goal is not a promise that within 3 months you will have achieved everything that you wanted. But we're going to target this. And then they're in the hunt. And as they get close to that first exam, either in practice they are hitting their goals, or in practice they're falling short, but we're like, great, you still have an opportunity to take this test and learn from it. And we're going to keep going. Because always, I think it's important to set your deadlines so that you always have plenty of time after whatever you're working towards, right? The student who, in the college admissions context, creates a plan where their first test is going to be December of senior year is probably in for some heartache,
Well,
right?
no, that's, you know what that student does? They sort of delay, right? Like I find the longer they think their test, like the real official test they're going to take is, they
right.
dawdle. It's like, it's not, if the pressing, and I think that's why kind of I tend to agree with Mike about the season because we wanted to be close enough that they feel that healthy pressure, right? The eustress, like I want
The
the
youth
use, and the
stress.
eustress is I need to feel like this is
Yep.
coming up. And so I can't let other things get in the way. So there's a little bit that I think the 2 to 3 month window can create that. However, to your point, Athena, I do think that with math skills kind of sadly never being lower than I've seen in my 32-year career, there are those students who might start their test prep in December of their junior year. No, and I know, you know, at the end of that semester, like second semester, they might be more likely to get their best math score at the end of junior year. But it's not that I want them to not test before then,
Right.
right?
I don't think that we should be taking them. I think it makes a ton of sense. 2 to 3 months makes a ton of sense, especially around like, hey, now we're consistently taking those mock tests. We're feeling like we're doing those simulations, and you feel highly motivated. I would say just because I'm experiencing students with lower foundational skills than normal, I
Yeah.
usually end up spending that first 1 to 2 months just trying to lay that groundwork. And so it gives us time to see small wins on the groundwork and build towards, okay, now we are in full ACT, SAT, high school entrance swing studying.
But I do agree with you. It is nice in the beginning to not feel this as a tutor, to not feel the pressure of the test day. Because I'm sure we all know the difference of, you know, like right now, we are still getting students who want to prepare for the April test. We're a month out. We're going to
Hmm.
try or do our best, but realistically, that is a lot of pressure on both student and tutor. And so that almost presumes we know this kid's going to retest. Although I will say this, that's the one thing I think that's interesting in all this conversation that's changed over my career is the idea of super
Mhm.
scoring, right? That can change things a little bit because you can then start to maybe micro focus if necessary, which might change the way you're motivating students because sometimes you're laser focusing on certain things, trying to get a particular score for that next,
Yeah,
test
totally.
date.
And something else that we really see is just, how students respond to the pressure. Some students get test anxiety is very normal, but how it's channeled, it can really be the difference between like a higher score and maybe not getting the score that you want. And so, how a student is able to channel that anxiety can manifest in, hey, we're waiting until the absolute last second. And that's kind of like that avoidant anxiety. And we normally don't see the best scores when that happens versus let me start early or let me figure out how to channel my anxiety in a way that is going to help me do well on this test.
So you're separating there sort of the type of student who might succeed versus maybe like hit their goal versus not. I'm curious, are there any other, reasons or things you can think of that would separate the students who hit their goals from the students who might not hit their goals, and kind of how much can tutors control that in the
I think tutors have
process?
a huge role in the process. I don't think of it in terms of low performing students aren't able to hit their target score. What their target score what we might say up front is, okay, well, what is in the realm of possibility for your target score? And maybe that is different, right? But we can still make progress with low performing students, and we can still make progress with high performing students. Where I see the difference in motivation is kind of like I said, between both low and high performing students, it's the need to see those small wins. So that's something that a tutor can really help manufacture and create and foster. So there's that. And then to our point on, having a trainer, it's just the idea of someone holding you accountable to, hey, you said you were going to do this last week for homework. Did you do it or not? And if, they like you, they trust you, they believe in you, they understand your rationale.
And they might want
Yeah,
to please you, and they
exactly.
want to please you sometimes, right? They want
Right.
to please your
They'll do
tutor.
it, and that'll hold them in the game. And what keeps students going and what keeps a student from doing well, actually, I should say, is um, are they going to put in that incremental work? Are they going to have that discipline? And then lastly, are they going to channel all of that plus that anxiety in a way that's going to be good? Or are we going to avoid taking the test? Are we going to avoid taking mock tests? Are we going to avoid practicing? Because that an avoidant response to anxiety, I think we call it like academic buoyancy. If they lack that academic buoyancy, it's highly unlikely they're going to hit their target score.
Academic buoyancy. Tell me a little more about that.
Yeah, it's just the idea. It's like, how does a student react to a setback, right? Like,
So that's resilience.
yeah, resilience. Exactly.
Right, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
I like
We might
buoyancy
call
though.
it the
Exactly.
perseverance, right? That's essentially. I love that term, but other people might know it by a
Totally.
different term, right? Yeah.
So is that really what distinguishes students that hit their goals from students that don't, is the resiliency versus brittleness, the or growth mindset versus fixed mindset, right? Is that mainly what we can attribute progress to, is the ability to progress even with momentary setbacks?
That's from my experience and from what we've been able to find in the research of how we've developed our system. Yeah, that's basically what we're seeing. And I think that holds true in life, right? Like the ability to persist, to
Yeah.
stay resilient, even when things get hard, because you're gonna have a moment where you freak out the day before the test of like, did I do enough? Am I gonna hit my score? Oh no, my entire future is riding on this. You're gonna have that freak out moment. That happens in, and that'll happen again and again and again in life. But being able to power through, to calm yourself down, to channel what you've done. And if you've done 1,000 reps, they say this in like, yeah, if
Right.
you've done a
Yes.
thousand reps, then your body, your brain knows what to do when the real.
Your
Exactly.
neural pathways should kick in really, hopefully, right, to overcome
Right,
that.
right. But that readiness, almost that eagerness to embrace when things get hard, because that really is for the kind of students who are trying to perform well on high stakes tests of any sort, where they're in direct competition with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of their peers. This is a sorting mechanism, and everybody hits
Right.
tough points along the way to practice and to the very end. The student who finds no difficulty in any of this process never worked with anybody for prep, because they were born to do it, I guess. It's like mortals need support and they need persistence.
Yeah, exactly. There will be some unicorn. My husband would be one of these people. You don't need to study for any
Mhm.
exam, and you can just kind of walk in there and do a great job. You're a unicorn. Some of
Yeah,
the unicorns exist out there. But for the most part,
that's
I
right.
would say in life, for test prep and beyond, you are going to have doubts, you're going to hit setbacks. How buoyant, resilient, persistent you are keeps you in the game. It keeps you fighting and pushing forward. And to be honest, when you've worked really hard for something, how great does it feel when you hit that target score? And it teaches you a lesson that you can do it again for the next goal.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Athena, we could talk with you all day about this topic. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
for
joining
having
us
me. It was so
today.
great talking to you both.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can email me directly at athena@topmarksprep.com or find me on LinkedIn at Athena Savino.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next tests and the rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.